So, Andrew, just to set up for the audience, your background, you've been a music producer, a manager, you ran Capitol Records, you're a musician yourself. Does that cover it?
Yeah, it's a lot. But I was a journalist first, so the journey of trying to find out what was behind a song or the idea behind how people got together was always there in the beginning.
And Jacob, how long have you and Andrew known each other?
Well, I think 30 years, but I'm not. Are you counting? I stopped counting. We met when I was 17 years old. He was producing Warren Zevon record that I visited, and then I guess we stayed together since.
Should we elaborate or no?
Well, not really.
Okay.
And how did this project begin?
It began with seeing the film. As I said, we saw this film. You never know what's going to really inspire something. Songwriters have said, the strangest things about what inspires the idea. And so we saw this film. We saw L.A. just in a way that looked so innocent, and the film reminded us of the music. I mean, for me, I grew up in New York, and so California always represented this thing about freedom, and so the sound of those records are what really drew me here. So for some reason, we saw that movie, and it just reminded us of that time, even though it's a little later, it's 1968. And we started to try to look at those songs and see, if we could do something interesting. And so we got some of our friends together to try to interpret them as duets, because those songs really are sung, originally by men in a band, except the case of the Mamas and Papas. And so in some cases they became a dialogue, between a man and a woman, like in Expecting to Fly, it's Regina and Jacob. And so that just expanded to what is really behind these songs, because you never know, because rock songs sometimes aren't written in code. And I think that covers it, I think.
Jacob, as you got into playing those songs, I wonder if you were discovering new things about them.
Once you start to play them? Yeah, you do. I mean, when you listen to them, words can just sound nice and go by. But once you start to record them yourself, and yeah, of course, you hear different things when you're actually singing them. That happens naturally.
And so, Andrew and you kind of placed you in this role of being a storyteller or extracting stories from these musicians. Is that something that you do a lot, or that comes naturally to you to ask people stories?
Do I go around extracting stories from people like Eric Clapton often? I don't. I would like to. No, I don't get to do that often. I don't think most people get to, of course. And I think hopefully I was able to get different answers than their typical answers, because I'm not a journalist or from a magazine. I wouldn't say, of course, I'm not a peer, but I'm a fan. But these are people that I know, some more than others. But that rapport was there, which I think enabled them to be maybe lighter or more funny or more truthful than they might be, with a microphone and a suit and tie in front of them.
Do people really interview with suit and ties now?
I think they do. Yeah.
Let's bring the lights up and take some questions from the audience. We'd love to hear what you think of this film. Right here, sir.
There was not one mention of Vietnam in this film, and was that a conscious decision?
The idea of the film is really more about the echo of inspiration. And it was more about, it starts with, Bells of Rhymney, which is in the line he sings, "Is there hope for the future?" And Bells of Rhymney is really the genesis, of the electrification of folk music, and it's the beginning of poetry in songs, and it's the inspiration for the song that starts it all, which is Mr. Tambourine Man. So it was more about the innocence of that period. We weren't really taking songs that explored that. And I don't really feel like in that period, it was more about a group of musicians coming together to this idyllic place to be in a band like the Beatles. And so the backdrop of what was going on socially at the time, was another kind of narrative that we just didn't really want to get into. I think it's for somebody else to do because it's not really reflected in these songs. A lot of them are love songs.
Okay, it's a question here. You have a microphone for it?
Yeah, I really felt the spirit of Fred Neil throughout this, because one thing that really struck me, every single person that you presented was hugely influenced by Fred, including Norah Jones. So I just wondered if you ran across the same thing, and I'm hoping to see Fred's story told soon.
Yeah, I don't think it hadn't come up in the film. I don't think it was integral to what we were doing really, but certainly if somebody had brought us down that path, we certainly would have explored it.
Amazing songwriter.
It's a hand up in the back, and then I'll get you in the front here, sir. We'll get a microphone to you. Look at that, running volunteer.
Jackson Browne was commenting during the documentary, but I didn't see him performing. Was he not part of the groups, or did you?
There are a couple people who were there and lived there, but and Jackson was young at that time, but he didn't write those songs. I mean, the people that are performing are mainly another generation of writers that live in California, and that was more the point of the film than to have them perform live.
Jacob, I wonder, in reflecting on all the stories that you extracted and working this, if you think about differences between that generation and your generation of musicians, is there anything that comes to mind?
Is there a difference? Well, yeah. I mean, I think it was.
They're older. Right?
Well, yeah, that's true. That's hopefully obvious. Well, it certainly was a different time. They were closer to the source as musicians, and there's more things in the air. I don't think business was as overwhelming as it is to people now. I don't think they even knew that they were going to have careers. I don't know how often they talked about business. But they were as early. I wouldn't say they were first, but they were maybe the second. And they were doing it before other people. My generation gets to benefit from that and from songwriting and learning what they did and how different they all were. But they were figuring out as they went, and they were opening doors that we all benefit from now. Big difference.
Question here. Get this gentleman in microphones. People back in here.
Yes. One thing. I'm hoping that there will. This is a great film, by the way. I'm hoping there will be a DVD version with the complete performances, if that's going to be possible. Also, I'm curious as to why there was no mention of Joni Mitchell. She was one artist that she was a resident.
Yeah, well, it's really about, again, the period where people come together and are in a band. And what Beck says is, this period starts with everyone seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and it really ends with Expecting to Fly when Neil Young breaks up the Springfield to go his own way. Joni Mitchell, there's a reason that the Buffalo Springfield are called Buffalo Springfield, and then they're called Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, because it's the era where the individual is trying to forge his own path, as Beck says in the film. So it's another film for somebody else to do from 68, on. I mean, this is really more about the end of the innocence of the idea of seeing A Hard Day's Night and thinking, wow, we're going to be in a band together and this is going to be great. And, in the film, you hear different things. Michelle Phillips tells you why that band broke up, because of, her having a good time. And, David Crosby tells you he was an asshole. And, and then Stephen Stills tells you that Neil Young wanted to go his own way. So the Joni thing and the singer-songwriter thing is really a different, it's a country rock, and it's a, and I think it probably has more to do with the Vietnam War and a reaction against psychedelia. This is like just up to the point of psychedelia. That's why Neil Young plays a psychedelic solo at the end.
Having gone so deep into this period, in the time that you've been making this, has it made you curious to look at some other music periods?
I would love the chance to do it all again. Just not right away. We just finished. Give me a minute.
I do want to, you know this, and people who make documentary films, we set out to do one thing, and we really found, we found something else. What we found was that, people came out here to be in bands, and that was it. We were starting to look at the electrification of folk music, and that was, and the shift from New York. And a friend of mine, a writer, Anthony De Curtis, said, he said the electrification of folk music might not have ever happened in New York because of the rigidity of the folk scene, and that in California there it was sort of more acceptable. And really in the film, the Rickenbacker, is
Not Bacher.
not Bacher, is the thing that's the through line, that if Roger hadn't picked up that guitar and he hadn't seen that film and done what he was doing, it never would have happened. As Tom Petty says, that changed rock and roll. So that was what was interesting to us.
Because this is one of the last interviews that Tom Petty gave, can you just reflect on what that experience was like?
Well, he was very encouraging to me individually, personally. I knew him for quite a while, but he was. My recollection was that he came down not knowing what it was going to be for, but because I'd asked, he said, okay. That was the message I kind of got, that he wasn't exactly sure what it was, but it was enough that I was asking, which was, that represents how he was, at least how he treated a younger generation. Because not all those guys are very encouraging and complimentary to younger people. Unnecessarily, I guess they feel threatened, but he was just nothing but encouraging to me, and I think to other artists that are my age as well.
Jacob did induct him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, that does. And
That's true.
So,
All right, we could take one or two more questions. Got one back there and then one up here.
Did you try to get Neil Young to participate, since so much was said about him and against him?
we did. But the thing is, as we were making the film, we realized that it was more powerful to not have him there and to have him play guitar at the end, which is what he did. He came and played on the record. I think we could have, but then it became, this sort of thing. I mean, we were also trying to capture the studios in each of those rooms where all those records were made, which are, it's amazing in Los Angeles that all of that stuff, the great studios in New York don't exist anymore, but they do exist there. And, so we shot them in a way just because we love them, and that was something. But it doesn't answer your question. We answered.
I can answer it better, actually. As we got him once, I think pushing our luck a second time, it wasn't going to happen. So happy to have him come down and play.
All right, get this woman a microphone right here. Here, he's gotcha.
Thanks for coming. I'm curious if either of you know if the current wildfires in California have affected Laurel Canyon, like Malibu, is gone.
Well, Malibu's not gone.
Oh,
There's
they
been
make it sound like.
Yeah, no, the whole thing is not gone, but there's obviously been. Actually, for people out there, we don't know either. I'm familiar with the area and have a lot of family and friends there, but nobody knows enough yet because nobody really gets to go home yet. But Laurel Canyon is totally fine. That's miles and miles away.
We got on a plane, it was kind of misting and raining, and the next thing, 2 days later, it's Armageddon.
So, Andrew, the film has just had a couple screenings so far. You had a screen out in Los Angeles. You've had this screening. Where is the film going from here? When can people start telling their friends that?
Andrew.
Dan Browne, are you here? Okay. I think in the next few months, I think it will wind up hopefully in a context like this. This is a beautiful theater, and thank you so much for having us, man. It just sounded great. We've got a lot of work to do to finish it, though.
Thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to Andrew Slater and Jakob Dylan.